I read a book called The Jungle Fighters about a man named Jules Archer, and the question I want to ask is what would give you the strength to go fight in a war if you were sent as an expendable GI to a country that you had no ties to fight for? Much like you can see in the case of the Suicide Squad, Jules and his team was sent to New Guinea, and they were told that they were not going to survive their time in the Pacific, and that they were going up against a very strong Japanese Marine Army, and they really were not supposed to live. Before World War II, America was a place where nationalism was running really low, and especially before Pearl Harbor and after Pearl Harbor, really not everyone wanted to fight. Jules Archer felt like he had no specific ties to fight for this country when he was drafted.
Oh, I've chosen my words carefully, Persian. Perhaps you should have done the same.
This is blasphemy. This is madness.
This is Sparta!
Before the war, Jules Archer, he was born in New York City, and he had fairly liberal beliefs before the war. He liked to spend his free time skiing, and like I said, he had no specific ties to fight for this country. His family never fought in wars, and he was drafted like many other men were.
It grabbed me out of high school. I still had one more year of high school to go, and they drafted me out of it.
Wow.
Well, I had an expertise that they were anxious to have. They needed my body in front of somebody important for the bullet to hit and keep from hitting anybody important. And that's about what it was.
When Jules and his team were sent to basic training, it was cut short by Pearl Harbor. So they actually were just broken down by the military, and they never got to the phase where the military builds them back up as they wanted to be. So he and his team really had kind of a hatred for the military, starting with the little things, like they had terrible food in the training camps.
Frozen.
Oh my God.
It's sour.
Once Jules and his team arrived at their station in New Guinea, they were hit by air raids every single night, and it was really a terrifying experience. And one of the experiences he had, they were in the jungle when one of the air raids went off, and the Japanese Marines actually invaded the little town thing they were staying in, and it was a near-death experience because the Japanese were crawling right over them, and he could just hear them. And he said in the book that he thought that he was going to die at that time, and reflecting back on it, he said that he would consider any time that he had to spend on this earth as pure gravy because he just felt like he had been reborn after that experience. The soldiers Jules and his team were going up against were a really savage group of Japanese Marines, and they really just didn't fear death. They thought that they were going to die if they didn't win the war anyway, so they would use some tactics like ambushing the Allies at night, and they would chant out army commands in English to get the American soldiers to charge right into their attacks, and they would also commit savage kamikaze attacks just to kill one or two Americans.
No.
Events like these just made Jules really have a hatred for the enemy, and it awoke some nationalism in him to fight this war for his country. While he was stationed in New Guinea, Jules had a lot of interaction with the native Papayans, and they really also, he grew attached to them, and it made him want to fight for them. Going into it, he didn't have a tie to fight for this country that he had never heard of, but once he got to love the people, it was easy for him to want to defend them. And they treated the Americans very well. There's one story about a bomber who was struck down over the Pacific, and a crew of 9 was being surrounded by sharks, and out of nowhere 2 natives rescued them on a log cut canoe. and things like that just made Jules and the other Americans want to fight for this country. The last key factor that really made Jules Archer want to fight was the Australian army. They had nothing really to fight for in this country, but they showed extreme heroism and the way they fought, and they really were true war heroes, and it inspired him and a lot of the other Americans to go out and fight. The final point I want to make is just that Jules was a man who was sent and he had nothing to fight for, and a series of events happened that made him become a great war fighter, and just all these things that inspired him just shows what a lot of these Americans had to go through to get inspired to fight this war.
In the year of our Lord, 1314, patriots of Scotland, starving and outnumbered, charged the fields of